Louis Creed, along with his beloved wife Rachel, their adorable children Ellie and Gage, and their cat Church, leave the hustle and bustle of Boston with the hope of a quieter life in Ludlow, Maine. The new forest house, nestled in nature and away from civilization, promises a fresh start. One day, while walking through the nearby forest, Ellie comes across an animal cemetery. Fascinated, she follows a group of children, all wearing animal masks, to this enigmatic place. In her curiosity, Ellie tries to climb a pile of dead wood, but a scare makes her stumble, fall, and get stung by a bee. Her neighbor, Jeff Crandall, appears at that moment, instantly establishing a warm bond with Ellie and her family. Meanwhile, Louis begins his new job at a university hospital. However, his day is tinged with tragedy when a young student, Victor Pakow, is killed by a car while skateboarding. Louis cannot save him, and the image of the dying young man haunts him in nightmares. In these visions, Victor desperately warns him to stay away from the forest, exclaiming urgently, "The barrier must never be crossed." Rachel, for her part, struggles with her own ghosts. The memory of her sister Zelda, who died young from meningitis, haunts her. Zelda's illness, which horrifically deformed her spine, left deep scars on Rachel, who was only 8 years old when the tragedy occurred. On the cold and eerie night of Halloween, Ellie's beloved cat, Church, meets his fatal fate under the wheels of a truck. The next morning, Louis and Judd discover the lifeless body of the cat on the icy road. Aware of the heartbreaking pain Ellie would feel upon learning of her beloved Church's death, Judd persuades Louis to bury the cat deep in the mysterious animal cemetery. Incredibly, the next day, Church returns from the dead. However, the cat that used to be tame and adorable is now dirty and aggressive. That same night, when Ellie comments that Church smells bad and tries to remove something tangled in his fur, the cat begins to growl and scratches her. To Louis and Rachel's horror, Church leaves them a macabre gift in their bed, a mutilated bird. Intrigued and disturbed, Louis goes to Judd the next day. Judd reveals to him that the place where they buried Church has the power to resurrect the dead, and that according to an urban legend, it is inhabited by the fearsome Wendigo, a powerful humanoid creature with a deer head. The ancient indigenous inhabitants of the forest feared the Wendigo, fleeing for fear of being cursed, possessed, or killed by it. Judd shares a disturbing personal story. When he was a child, he buried his dog in that place, and the animal returned aggressive and dirty. Finally, after finding Church in Gage's bed, Louis makes the difficult decision to abandon the cat at the side of the road, planning to tell Ellie that it has run away. On Ellie's birthday, the sorrow over Church's escape casts a shadow over what should be a happy day. During a game of hide-and-seek with her brother Gage and her friend Louis, Ellie catches a glimpse of Church walking down the road. Without thinking twice, she rushes towards him. Gage, seeing his sister, follows her, while a tanker truck speeds towards them. The driver, distracted by a phone call, tries to brake and steer away to avoid Gage, who is saved at the last moment by his father. However, the truck's tank detaches and, in a tragic twist of fate, strikes and kills Ellie in the middle of the road. Ellie's burial is a sea of sorrow. The family, engulfed in sadness, tries to come to terms with the loss. Rachel, unable to face her grief at home, decides to spend a few days with her parents, taking Gage with her. Shortly after, Louis visits Judd, who, with a mix of concern and sadness, tells him that he knows he plans to bury Ellie in the spot behind the Pet Sematary, where he had previously buried Church. Judd tries to dissuade Louis, warning him that Ellie will return, but she will not be the same Ellie as before. Judd ends up falling asleep, unaware that Louis had discreetly added sleeping pills to his drink. Louis's decision is made, and nothing can change it. Louis, driven by desperation and pain, digs up Ellie's body in the cemetery and reburies her in the mysterious ground behind the animal cemetery. That night, Ellie returns home, but she is no longer the same. Her pale face and her cold, aggressive attitude are a grim reflection of the girl she used to be. Meanwhile, at Rachel's parents' house, she is increasingly worried. Gage has recurring nightmares and mentions Victor Pacow, which increases Rachel's anxiety. Desperate to contact Louis, she tries to call him repeatedly, but without success. Worried, Rachel calls Judd and expresses her concern about not being able to reach Louis. Judd, alarmed, heads to the Crete house to check that everything is fine. Louis assures him that everything is fine and shuts the door in his face. As he walks away, Judd sees Ellie watching him from her bedroom window, which fills him with terror. He runs to take refuge in his house and arms himself with a gun, determined to kill Ellie a second time. However, his plan is thwarted by the sudden appearance of Church. In that moment of distraction, Ellie seizes the opportunity to cut his Achilles tendon with a scalpel she found in her father's first aid kit. In a macabre twist, Ellie briefly takes on the appearance of Judd's deceased wife, Norma, and delights in reproaching him about Norma and herself before stabbing him to death. Rachel, with Gage in her arms, bursts into the house, surprising Louis. Noticing that Louis has his hands and shoes covered in dirt, Rachel asks him what's going on. Louis, with a trembling voice, confesses that he wasn't ready to let Ellie go forever, that her death was his fault, and that he had to bring her back. He tells her about the place hidden behind the Pet Sematary, which has the power to bring the dead back to life. Ellie appears before Rachel, who, horrified, climbs the stairs with Gage in her arms. Louis tries to convince Rachel that Ellie is still their daughter, that God has given them a second chance, and that he is willing to do whatever it takes not to waste that opportunity again. However, he soon realizes that Ellie has disappeared and heads to Judd's house in the hope of finding her. But it was a trap set by Ellie, who silently grabs a kitchen knife and heads upstairs to track down her mother and brother. While Louis heads to Judd's house, Rachel has a hallucination of Zelda and is then attacked by Ellie, who stabs her. Rachel manages to escape and runs to take refuge in the bathroom with Gage. Louis finds Judd's lifeless body in his house. He returns home and sees Rachel trying to pull Gage out through the bathroom window. Louis catches Gage, but Rachel is stabbed again by Ellie in the spine. Louis locks Gage in the family car and goes to find a dying and paralyzed Rachel, who begs him not to bury her behind the Pet Sematary. Ellie knocks Louis out, leaving him unconscious, and drags her mother's body into the woods where she buries it behind the Pet Sematary. Louis finally wakes up and finds Ellie in the woods. She reproaches him that it is all his fault. He was the one who brought his family to Ludlow, and he was the one who buried them behind the Pet Sematary. Church and her. They fight, and while Louis prepares to decapitate Ellie with a shovel, he is stabbed with a weather vane by a resurrected Rachel. Louis is also buried behind the Pet Sematary by Ellie. The trio burns Judd's house before heading to the family car, where Gage is still locked inside. The movie ends with the beep of the car remote, suggesting that the last family member is going to suffer the same fate as their parents and sister.